At first glance, Peeps look like one of the simplest candies ever sold in America. They have no filling, no chocolate shell, no layered interior, no caramel pull, and no hidden center waiting to be revealed after the first bite. A Peep is essentially marshmallow shaped into a chick coated in colored sugar and given two tiny black eyes. The formula sounds so basic that most people would assume it could be made almost instantly. In modern factories, that assumption is basically true. According to the source text, the full process now takes only about 6 minutes from the moment the syrup is mixed to the moment the finished candy is packaged and ready to ship. What makes the story interesting is that this same candy once required 27 hours to produce. Before industrial automation transformed the line, each marshmallow chick had to be piped by hand, with a pastry bag shaped individually, then left to dry overnight before it could hold its form well enough to be packed. That means a product now associated with speed abundance and mass seasonal ritual was once slow, delicate, and labor-intensive. The source treats that contrast as the key to understanding Peeps. The candy itself did not become famous because it grew more complex. It became famous because the process became dramatically more efficient. That efficiency, however, came with a price. The machine that finally compressed production from 27 hours down to 6 minutes could not preserve the original handmade shape. The early chicks had small wings on their sides, and those wings caused problems when engineers tried to scale the process. At high speed, the extra protrusions interfered with the machinery catching on the nozzles and slowing the line. So the wings disappeared. In 1955, according to the source, the design was simplified so that manufacturing could accelerate without interruption. The candy lost a decorative detail, but the factory gained a repeatable system that could run continuously. That trade-off between shape and speed is what gives the history of Peeps its strange significance. On the surface, this is just a marshmallow Easter candy. But underneath it is a story about mechanization, design, compromise, industrial food engineering, and the way tradition can be built from something that was originally just a production problem waiting to be solved. A product that is mostly air became a national ritual, not because it was handmade forever, but because one machine eliminated the biggest bottleneck in the process. Once that happened, the candy could stop being a novelty made in limited batches and start becoming a staple that returned identically year after year. That is the paradox at the center of Peeps. A tiny chick made of whipped sugar became culturally durable because the production process became brutally efficient. To understand why that change mattered, the source first takes us back to the Rada Candy Company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where Peeps were originally made in the early 1950s. This was not yet a huge industrial operation, turning out millions of identical units per day. It was a much smaller seasonal business focused on marshmallow chicks for Easter and little else. The pace of production reflected that scale. A worker stood over trays dusted with sugar, holding a cloth pastry bag filled with warm marshmallow, and squeezed out each chick by hand. One body, one head, tiny side wings, then the next chick, and the next, all arranged carefully in rows. After shaping, the trays were left out overnight so the marshmallow could dry and firm up enough to survive packaging. Only the following day were the candies ready to move forward. That older method matters because it shows what Peeps were before automation flattened the process into a repeatable industrial rhythm. The candy was once closer to bakery work than factory work. Its shape depended on the control of a worker's hands. Its drying time depended on waiting. Its daily volume was limited not just by ingredients, but by human endurance, available tray space, and the physical reality that marshmallow needed time to set. A 27-hour cycle was not simply inefficient by modern standards, it was a ceiling on growth. No matter how popular the product became, the process itself resisted scale. The source presents Rada as exactly the kind of company that could make a beloved seasonal product, but could not easily transform it into a national phenomenon. The chicks were charming and recognizable, but they were still trapped inside a production method that belonged to a smaller era of candy making. Every handmade detail that gave the product character also made it difficult to expand. The wings were cute, but they took precision. The slow drying preserved the shape, but it delayed output. The result was a candy that could exist successfully within a narrow seasonal niche, without ever becoming a truly massive commercial ritual. This is why the source treats the pre-automation period almost like a lost version of Peeps' same concept, same holiday function, but a completely different manufacturing identity. The handmade chick was local, limited, and slow. It belonged to a world where candy companies could survive on modest seasonal runs. Once demand or ambition outgrew that model, the process itself became the obstacle.
Thank you. We'll take the box.
In that sense, Rada did not
Thanks,
merely
mister.
produce early Peeps. It also revealed the exact point where craft turned into bottleneck. The company had a recognizable product, but not a system that could flood stores across the country. That distinction set the stage for what happened next, when a larger company saw not just a seasonal marshmallow chick, but a process waiting to be redesigned from the ground up. That company was Just Born, which bought Rada in 1953 and immediately recognized that the marshmallow chick had far more commercial potential than its original production system could support. The source frames this takeover as the turning point in the history of Peeps. Just Born had been founded in 1917 by Sam Born, a Russian immigrant, who started with a candy shop in Brooklyn and built his business through both invention and acquisition. He was not simply a confectioner in the old artisanal sense. He was an engineer-minded entrepreneur who looked at handmade candy methods and saw mechanisms that could replace them. His earlier work included a machine that automatically inserted sticks into lollipops, which is exactly the kind of detail the source uses to show how deeply mechanization was embedded in the company's DNA. By the time Just Born acquired Rada, the company already had experience buying smaller candy operations and transforming their labor-heavy processes into scalable production systems. What Bob Born, Sam's son, reportedly saw in Rada's marshmallow line was not just an Easter novelty, but a classic industrial bottleneck. The product was viable. The demand could be expanded. The obstacle was time. 27 hours for one batch was not a charming legacy method to preserve. It was a structural limit on volume growth and profitability. So Bob Born spent roughly 2 years designing what the source describes as an automated depositor, a machine capable of piping, shaping, and coating marshmallow in one continuous operation. That is the real breakthrough in the Peeps story. The company did not invent marshmallow chicks from nothing. It reinvented the means of making them. Once the machine worked, production time dropped from 27 hours to 6 minutes. A candy that had once depended on manual piping and overnight drying could now move through a near-seamless industrial sequence. This was not just a speed improvement. It transformed the entire business model. Faster production meant larger seasonal output, lower effective labor cost per unit, more predictable shape, easier packaging, broader retail distribution, and eventually a much stronger claim on the Easter market itself. But the source is careful not to treat the machine as a purely triumphant invention. It stresses that the engineering solution required aesthetic sacrifice. The original winged chicks could not survive high-speed automation because the extra shape complexity caused jams. The design had to be simplified so the line could run without interruption. In 1955, the wings disappeared, and with them went a small piece of the handmade version's personality. That loss is symbolic. It shows that industrial food design does not merely copy craft at larger scale, it edits craft to fit the logic of machinery. What survives is whatever the system can repeat cleanly, quickly, and continuously. Peeps became more successful by becoming less intricate. The machine did not preserve the original chick exactly. It selected the version of the chick that production could tolerate, then turned that simplified form into tradition. Once the history of the machine is in place, the source shifts to the material itself and explains why a Peep behaves the way it does. The ingredient list is not elaborate. Sugar, corn syrup, gelatin, and a coating of colored sugar
the
crystals.
Consistency of the taffy is
Yet
what
the
matters.
physical transformation
Precision in
those
the gears
ingredients
ensures
undergo is
uniformity in every
surprisingly
batch.
dramatic. Sugar and corn syrup are heated until they dissolve into a dense liquid, then combined with gelatin that has already been bloomed in warm water. The source specifies that this gelatin is derived from pigskin collagen, which is important because gelatin is what gives structure to what would otherwise
Clear
be
those
little
trays
more than
now.
sweet foam.
We can't let the pink
Without
line
that
back up
protein
again.
network,
Move it.
the whipped mixture would collapse. With it, the candy can trap air and hold shape long enough to become stable, transportable, and biteable. The air, in fact, is the real product. The source repeatedly emphasizes that Peeps are roughly 90% air by volume.
I understand.
And that this is
We will
not a
implement the
decorative
new design
exaggeration,
immediately.
but the central fact of the candy's texture. When industrial whisks beat the hot syrup and gelatin mixture at high speed, they fold in air over and over again. The mixture expands first, doubling, then tripling, turning from a dense amber syrup into a white, fluffy marshmallow mass. What seems light and playful to the consumer is actually an engineered foam, a network of microscopic air bubbles held in place by gelatin walls thinner than a human hair. That structure is what makes a peep compress slightly under a finger and spring back instead of flowing away like syrup. The source also explains that temperature control is crucial in this stage. The whipped marshmallow must remain fluid enough to move through heated pipes reportedly kept at around 60 degrees Celsius, but not so hot that it loses the consistency needed for accurate shaping. This is where the machine becomes more than a simple depositor. It is really a timing system that manages viscosity, temperature, pressure, and speed all at once. If the mixture cools too much, it stiffens before it can be shaped. If it moves too quickly, the details of the chick form become distorted. If it moves too slowly, the body spreads before the head settles properly. What appears on the outside as a toy-like Easter candy is in process terms a narrow window of controlled instability. This section of the source is important because it reframes Peeps as a piece of industrial food engineering rather than just a sugary holiday novelty. The candy is simple only at the level of ingredients. At the level of structure, it is a carefully managed foam stabilized by protein pressure, heat, and timing. That is why the 6-minute process is impressive. It does not merely combine sugar and gelatin. It repeatedly creates a delicate architecture of trapped air, then moves that architecture through shaping, coating, cooling, and packaging before it can collapse. A peep feels insubstantial in the hand because it is mostly empty space. But that emptiness has to be manufactured with precision. The depositor is the heart of the modern Peeps process, and the source describes it almost like a choreography of machinery. After the marshmallow has been whipped and kept fluid inside heated pipes, it is fed into a row of nozzles moving in a precise pattern above a conveyor belt. Each nozzle first lays down the body of the chick, then loops back to deposit the head on top. That sounds straightforward, but the timing is exact. If the head lands too early or too late, the shape slips out of alignment. If the belt slows or the marshmallow spreads too fast, the chick loses definition. The machine must create recognizable forms at speed without ever stopping the line. That is the design problem Bob Hope solved, and the source makes clear that even after decades of refinement, the principle remains essentially the same. One of the most striking details in the source is that Peeps are always produced in rows of 5, because each pass of the depositor lays down 5 connected chicks at the base. In other words, the package shape is not just a marketing decision made later. It is built into the logic of the machine itself. The belt keeps moving, the nozzles keep cycling, and row after row emerges as a continuous industrial rhythm. During peak operation, the source says the line can produce roughly 390 chicks per minute. At that speed, what once took a worker hours of repetitive hand piping is now reduced to a nearly uninterrupted mechanical pattern. The coating stage follows immediately while the marshmallow is still wet enough to grab onto sugar crystals. The source describes a curtain of colored sugar falling from above as the chicks pass beneath it. These crystals are coarser than ordinary table sugar, specifically sized to catch the light and create a sparkling surface that has become part of the brand's identity. Excess sugar is blown away from below, with compressed air jets leaving the coating even, but not even. For many years, yellow was the dominant or only color, but later production expanded into pink, blue, orange, and lavender, with separate lines and full cleaning cycles required between color changes. Even such a playful visual choice becomes in factory terms a scheduling and sanitation issue. After coating, the chicks enter a cooling tunnel at about 18 degrees Celsius, where dry air circulates until the marshmallow sets enough to hold shape while still remaining soft to the bite. At the end of the line, a stamping mechanism presses on the iconic eyes using black edible carnauba wax. The source notes that every Peep's eyes are aligned the same way, which is why they all seem to stare in one direction. Then the rows are placed into trays, sealed and boxed. What used to depend on hand shaping and overnight rest now moves from liquid sugar to packaged candy in roughly 6 minutes. The result is not just faster production. It is a fully integrated system in which shape, coating, cooling, decoration, and packaging all operate as one continuous sequence. Once the process was mechanized, Peeps stopped being a small seasonal candy and became a large-scale commercial engine. The source describes the Bethlehem factory running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during peak season, producing millions of chicks per day from a single line. That level of output changes the meaning of the product. A handmade marshmallow chick can be a regional specialty. A machine-made marshmallow chick produced in continuous volume can become a national ritual. The source estimates that more than 2 billion Peeps are made each year, with Easter accounting for over 70% of all sales. In practical terms, a relatively short holiday window generates enough demand to sustain a much larger year-round operation. That seasonal concentration is one of the most revealing parts of the story. Peeps are not an everyday candy in the way gum chocolate bars or hard candy are. Their identity is tied to return. They reappear in stores as Easter approaches, fill baskets, end up on kitchen counters, get handed to children, photographed, microwaved, debated, eaten, or left half-finished, then disappear again until the next cycle begins. Because the product is so strongly tied to a recurring holiday, it does not need to dominate the entire calendar. It only needs to dominate a specific emotional and commercial window. According to the source, 8 weeks of seasonal intensity can support the rest of the year. The text is especially sharp on one point. Peeps became the #1 non-chocolate Easter candy in America without needing a huge, celebrity-backed media mythology. The larger driver was manufacturing. A machine designed by the grandson of an immigrant candy maker made the product cheap enough, consistent enough, and abundant enough to become standard. Once it became common in Easter baskets, repetition did the rest. People grew up seeing the same chicks in the same season, and that predictability became a form of value. The candy did not have to prove itself as exceptional every year. It only had to return in a recognizable form and at a price low enough to remain ordinary. This is where the source's argument becomes broader than candy history. It suggests that in mass consumer culture, familiarity often matters more than intrinsic complexity. Peeps are not treasured because they offer extraordinary flavor depth or ingredient sophistication. They are treasured because they are repeatable, easy to recognize, and woven into a ritual. The 6-minute process made that ritual commercially possible. Without it, the handmade chick might have remained a charming but limited Easter item. With it, the product became stable enough in price, volume, and appearance to embed itself across generations. The machine did not just increase output, it gave American retail culture a product simple enough to scale and predictable enough to become tradition. If the story ended with efficiency and seasonal popularity, Peeps would already be an interesting example of industrial food design. But the source adds another layer by focusing on how strangely durable the candy is once it has been made. A Peep is mostly air held together by a gelatin matrix and covered with a thin shell of sugar. Intuitively, that sounds fragile. It sounds like the kind of thing that should collapse, dissolve, or disintegrate with very little effort. Yet the source points to the opposite impression. Once formed and dried, the candy becomes unexpectedly resistant. That contrast between airy composition and stubborn physical survival is part of what keeps Peeps fascinating to people beyond their role as Easter candy. The most memorable evidence comes from a 1999 set of experiments at Emory University mentioned in the source. Researchers reportedly submerged Peeps in boiling water, acetone, sulfuric acid, and sodium hydroxide, expecting the marshmallow to break down more readily than it did. Instead, the candy survived all of them. Only phenol, a highly toxic solvent, managed to dissolve the structure after extended exposure. Even then, according to the source, the tiny carnauba wax eyes floated intact. Whether people remember the exact solvents or not, the point is unmistakable. A candy that feels soft and insubstantial in the hand turns out to be chemically stubborn in ways most consumers would never guess. The source offers a working explanation rooted in structure rather than magic. By the time a Peep reaches the consumer, it contains very little free water. The sugar shell and the gelatin network create a barrier that many liquids cannot easily penetrate, especially not quickly. The candy is porous in the everyday sense that it is full of trapped air, but it is not open and watery in the way a fresh dessert foam would be. That difference matters. The texture may feel delicate on the tongue, yet the material arrangement can still resist attack from the outside. Microwaving offers a more visible demonstration of the same point. The source notes that a Peep can swell dramatically, reportedly to several times its original size when heated. This is not because the candy becomes more substantial, but because the air already trapped inside expands as the gelatin softens around it. The candy that began as engineered foam briefly reveals its structure in exaggerated form. People often do this not because they expect a better snack, but because the object is fun to test. In that sense, Peeps invite casual experimentation. They are simple enough to be playful, cheap enough to sacrifice, and weird enough to surprise. 6 minutes to manufacture, yet far harder to undo than their lightness would suggest. The final section of the source explains why Peeps endure. And its answer is almost the opposite of culinary excellence. People do not return to them each spring because the flavor is unusually refined. Most consumers describe the taste in the same blunt terms: sugar, marshmallow, sweetness, and not much else. What brings them back is repetition. There is a ritual in pulling one chick away from the row, feeling the slight crack where the sugar crust separates, noticing how light it seems in the hand and biting through the shell into the soft center. The sensory experience is brief, but it is familiar, and familiarity is doing most of the cultural work. That is why the loss of the wings matters symbolically. The machine simplified the shape, removed friction from production, and made the candy easier to manufacture at scale. In doing so, it also fixed the modern peep in place. Since 1955, the design has barely changed. Same chick silhouette, same two dark eyes, same sugary exterior, same seasonal return. The source suggests that this consistency is the real secret. Peeps do not need novelty to survive. Their power lies in showing up again in almost exactly the same form, turning a modest industrial candy into something that feels permanent in the calendar. Seen this way, Peeps are impressive, not because they are complex, but because they are efficient, repeatable, and culturally sticky.
Look how squishy it is.
A handmade seasonal confection
Save
became
some
an
for
American
later, honey.
ritual once the production bottleneck disappeared.
Here you go, Grandpa.
The shape got simpler, the process got faster, the price became accessible, and the market absorbed the product into Easter tradition. What remains today is a candy that is mostly air-produced in minutes, but reinforced by decades of memory. That combination is what makes Peeps more than a sugary novelty. They are proof that in consumer culture, the most enduring products are often not the most sophisticated ones, but the ones that return reliably enough to feel inevitable.